Hey everyone, welcome back to another devlog from Bounding Maine. This is the fourth devlog now. I will say this devlog was a little bit shorter, just because a lot of the work I did in this was more conceptual rather than something I can sort of like actually put into a video. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started. So first off, I sort of worked on some things I needed to address, especially in the last devlog I was talking about. So the first thing was, I was talking to one of the commenters, shout out to Seal Sharp. He suggested the idea of object culling, and to me, I was pretty sure I already had object culling on by default, but as it turns out, I sort of took a little bit of a closer look at that, because there's a checkbox in the camera to enable culling. But as it turns out, you have to bake the culling data before it actually does anything, and so this whole time I wasn't using object culling. So why did I enable object culling, or why do I want object culling? So essentially what it lets me do, it will only render in the objects that the camera's looking at. And so if there's like some corridors behind you or something, there's no need to render that in, no one can see it. And so it just saves a lot of processing time on that and improves performance for the game. So yeah, it was sort of an easy thing to overlook. I thought it was just all set up, but apparently not. So thank you for saying that to remind me to make me double check that. And sort of on the topic of some more, not necessarily performance, but just some refactoring. That makes sense. So how we have it set up in Bounding Maine is that we have baked all the textures on all the corridors and objects in Blender. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that necessarily, but I realized, like, I was talking to another commenter, and their name was the Hemoskin Project. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but they were talking about using tileable materials instead of baking the materials. And, that's a good idea. I just sort of forgot, I guess, that you don't have to bake the materials. And so the reasons why we want to use tileable material instead, it allows us to use one material for all the objects. And this allows us to just change that material if we want to change something on all of it, which is a great thing. It's sort of a thing that we always try to attain in programming, is having everything sort of centralized. And that's the concept of dry code. Where you're not duplicating your code all over the place, you just have one spot to control it all. And that's sort of one benefit of a tileable texture. It also just gives me a lot more control. It's a lot easier to make a good looking tileable texture with diffuse and normal maps and stuff. And so that's another benefit. There also might be a thing we can do with GPU instancing to improve performance even more with that, but I'm not sure. So don't take my word for that. See, anyways, the process of doing that. So what I had to do, I needed to go back into Blender and remove all the lights on the models just to get them ready. So I did that. And so there was a few main textures I wanted to redo. So first there was the rusty metal. There was the regular, like, sort of shiny pipe metal. There was the metal mesh or grate on the floor. And then there's also the caution tape on the airlock door. And those are sort of the main ones that I need to use diffuse maps and stuff with. And so what I decided to do for that is I used it in the last devlog, I believe, for the terrain, or maybe the second one. I used a program called Filter Forge, and I use that for the sand tiles and textures for that. But Filter Forge is pretty epic because you can do all sorts of different textures in it, right? And so what I did, I just went through Filter Forge. They have a lot of really great filters that you can use online on the website. You can just find the one you want, and then you can import it into the program, and then export the diffuse, normal, and bump maps. And so this is perfect for what I'm trying to do. I can make these really great looking tileable textures, and as you can see in game, I think it looks really good. It's given the rusty material just a little more color instead of it being such a flat brownish color, and I do like that. It all just looks a little better, higher res, because they're made by smarter people than me. They're better at making textures. Yeah, I was really happy with how that turned out. And as I said a minute ago, I removed all the light models, and so that sort of goes into the next thing I did. So in the last devlog, I made this model for the light, and I wanted to do this for a few reasons, but the first was that there was way too many point lights in the scene, and I needed to cut down on that. The second is also that I wasn't super happy with how the old light looked on the corridors, because it's sort of just like a cube trapezoid type thing, and so I wanted it to look a little more old, if that makes sense. And so that's sort of why I did that. And so after modeling that, I put it into Unity, and I went through and manually placed all these lights. And yeah, that took a little while, but the big benefit to that is that I was able to cut back on the light count a lot. Now, I probably ended up with 4 times less lights than I'd had before, and so that's a huge performance improvement. For these lights, I did keep with the point light. I could maybe swap that out to a spotlight at some point, but I was having a few small issues with that, so I'll have to look at that later, but right now they're all just point lights. And so since there's so many less lights, what I can do is I can enable shadows, and so now we have shadows in the game. And this has really made a big improvement, I think, just to the overall look of the environment, because having fewer lights, it really looks a lot more dynamic. It's not always just super evenly lit everywhere. There's like darker regions, and then it's brighter over here. And I also like how much control it gives me over where my lights are in the scene too. You know, obviously it's a little more work to place all the lights, but no one's placing these corridors procedurally or anything, right? So we're good. Yeah, because before, when I had all the lights on the corridors, I was getting maybe around 20 FPS, which is with shadows enabled, which was pretty abysmal. But now we're getting about around 120, and that's a pretty respectable frame rate, I think. And obviously, you know, keep in mind that's on ultra settings. So I think that'll be just fine for this project. Another thing I started sort of getting into is the Decal Projection in Unity. And this allows you to project an image onto a surface or a mesh. And so what I set up here really quick is I just made this like blood text and this is basically, it's sort of assumed that the monster drew this on the walls. This would show up later throughout the game as the monster is a little more evolved, but that's what that's for. And that worked really well, actually. It's a cool sort of system with that. Being able to project stuff like that, it makes it way easier instead of having to actually bake that into the model. And another really quick thing, it doesn't really relate to anything super heavily, but I realized that for emission textures, like when I was setting up the emission texture on the lights, you can increase the strength of the emission texture, which makes it have a stronger bloom, and I really wish I knew that. Yeah, now it's looking really good though. It looks like it's glowing like a real light. So I'm really happy that that turned out. It's time for the funny segment of how I'm feeling right now about the project. I almost feel like I'm sort of stuck in like a development hell stage. I know it's not really development hell yet. I'm glad that I'm finally getting around to working the monster. It's sort of like ripping off a band-aid. The monster is it's such a difficult thing to sort of get started on. Getting started on it and doing it, even if it's not going to be exactly perfect the first time around, I think it's just a good thing to do. So that was really some of the smaller stuff, just like the little things here and there that I wanted to get done. But now it is time for the moment that we've all been waiting for. It's time to finally get started on the actual monster. So before I get into the modeling process, I just want to talk about sort of my idea for the AI and sort of the overall design of this. So the way I sort of approach the AI for this monster, I don't know if this is like a thing or not. It's just sort of what I made up in my own head. But I sort of looked at it as like there's 2 types of AI. There's event-based and then there's real-time AI. And so event-based is sort of like, okay, players at this section, if they cross this trigger, it plays this event or whatever. It's very scripted and controlled, whereas real-time would be something like, you know, a monster that actually exists in the environment and moves around and follows the player. And so I sort of battled between like which one is going to work best for the game. And I think I'm going to go with event-based AI just for a few reasons. First off, it gives me more control over the behavior of the monster. And so I can make it feel a little more natural and not so janky at times, because it takes a lot of work to refine like a real moving AI. It also meant that it's a little safer because the event-based AI is very like straightforward. What can happen sometimes with real AI, I mean, I'm sure if you've played any game, you've seen this before, where the AI can get stuck on things, and I don't want that to happen because that'll immediately break the whole experience if someone has to restart the game. And so I really want to avoid that. And so sort of the design of the AI, what I'm doing, I'm having 2 variables set up. And so the first one is going to be the aggression level. And this is basically, it's pretty straightforward. It's how active the monster is, let's say. So if a higher aggression level means that the monster will attack the player more, and these events will also be happening more frequently. The second variable is the evolution factor, and it's not really anything special, but it's just a value to hold the current evolution of the monster. And so my idea is that I want 3 stages of evolution as the player goes throughout the game. And so it starts off as a very small, little, basic organism, but but then as the player plays, it starts getting more advanced and it can do more scary things. That's just sort of how I designed this AI. Now, for example, I wanted like a few specific events to happen. Like when the monster's at a low evolution level, maybe there's banging on the corridors or something like that. But then as the monster evolves, maybe that banging turns into a knock, or maybe they start writing text instead of just plain blood splatters. I also think it'd be really cool if I could record player audio, or like record someone's mic and then play that audio back through the monster. Like it's taking the words that the player's been saying and then it's sort of trying to learn and evolve to say those same words. And I think that'd just be a really cool idea. I don't know how easy that would be to do with Unity, so I'll have to check on that. But if that's something I can do, I feel like I definitely want to do that. I think it would just add a cool little, like, would add a fun little spooky moment. So now it's time for the hard part, and this was actually modeling the monster. So this devlog, I only modeled the first evolution of it because that's all I need right now. I just need to get that AI sort of in place. And I wanted this monster to sort of like be based off of a few defining characteristics. So obviously no eyes because it's underwater and there's no light. So why would it evolve eyes? I also felt it would make sense for it to have lots of like antenna-like structures, and that would basically be its like way of feeling around the environment. It also had to have legs. It couldn't really be a fish because it has to be able to move around inside the facility. And so if it didn't have legs, that would it wouldn't be a very good monster. And so I basically almost took like a crab or spider-like approach to this monster, because you know, crabs are a sea creature that, you know, that are able to navigate a facility sort of like this, and so that's what I base it off of. So I'm not very good at modeling creatures. I'm much better at modeling more things like structures or objects. I'm just better at it. I don't know. So it was definitely a challenge for me to model this. I initially started off trying to sculpt, but I realized that's just not going to work for this, especially for this game. You know, it's not exactly low poly, but it's sort of on the lower end of that resolution. So I figured the best way to do this was just going to be to make like different segments of the legs and stuff. So I started off with a cube. I added these sort of crab-like legs to the sides. And then that's when I sort of started to shape out the body a little more. I sort of added an area for the mouth. I added antennas all around, like I was talking about before, like a sort of tail type of thing. And this monster's fine. It's good enough for now. I'm not super happy with it. I think it could be better, but honestly, this has been the hardest part of this project, I think, so far, is just trying to really understand what I want the monster to be and what I want it to look like. Because, you know, it's such an important part of the project. There's a lot of pressure to make sure this is going to work right. Because if the monster is stupid, then the whole game's going to be stupid. So that's really what I want to try to avoid. This is fine. The thing is with this game, like the player's not really going to see the monster very much. It's going to be sort of a thing where like whenever the player sees it, it's already going to be on its way out of your sight. So I'm not super worried about the design. I probably could have maybe even gotten away with not modeling it at all. But I just wanted to have that model just in case, you know, just so that the player can see like a shadow or some dark object in the corner of their eye. I want it to be very mysterious and not very visible because I want the player to fill in those details and imagine the worst. But yeah, that's what I went with. In the future, I will have to model the two other evolutions, and so there'll be like an in-between evolution, and then for the third evolution, I want it to be more of like a humanoid monster. I want this monster to basically be evolving in the direction of the creatures that it sees around its environment. And so since, you know, the player is there in the facility, it's sort of learning from the player's behavior and anatomy, I guess, and evolving towards that direction. I also just think evolving intelligence is sort of a scary thing, right? As soon as something's intelligent and can think for itself, that's when things start to get scary, because then it's unpredictable and then it can outsmart you. At least that's the idea. But yeah, model that monster. And so what I did, I put this into Unity and I made a prefab for this. and I set up inverse kinematics for the legs. And so inverse kinematics allows you to take an endpoint, like for example, the foot on this monster, and then we can automatically determine where the other two leg pieces need to be to make sure that it's connecting to the foot in the right position. And so you can see me moving around the foot. It looks really good. Like the leg will move with the foot. And so this will allow me to do some really cool animation stuff with that. Probably didn't need to add inverse kinematics for this. I probably could have just animated it in Blender, but I didn't. We're going to work with it. Yeah, I didn't really have much time to actually start adding a lot of these AI events, but you know, I will be working on that in a future devlog at some point. But yeah, sorry for the shorter devlog. I just didn't have quite as much time. As always, I'm completely open to ideas and suggestions about anything in this video. You know, if you have ideas about the lighting, the textures, or you know, the behavior, design of the monster, then please give me some tips, because I really do appreciate it. It does help me get through this game a lot easier. Yeah, I don't have a super specific question or anything to ask at the end of this one, but I guess just sort of give me some ideas for some events that could happen in game, if you want, obviously. You know, like for example, I have a few, like maybe the monster pushes a grate off the wall, or writes some text in blood on the wall, or you know, something like that. Just some sort of event. It can be whatever, right? Just I would, you know, if you have ideas, I would love to hear them. So feel free to put those in the comments. Well, that's gonna be it for the video. I appreciate everyone for watching, and I hope to get some more videos out pretty soon. Okay. Bye.